Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome to a new episode on Torah Over 10, your weekly dose of Torah context in 10 minutes or more. This week, we're going to be covering a double portion, so in one of the rare cases in this series, we're going to be going over 10 minutes. This week, we'll be covering Tazria and Metzora, Leviticus 12:1 to 15:33. I'm Hernan Cortez II, and let's get started. Portion recap. Tazria and Metzora are about demystifying what purity is. And purity is a complex issue and a complex concept within the Torah and the prophets and the New Testament and the entirety of the text. Because clean, unclean, purity, sin, these things are all intermixed, even more so now in our modern world. And especially with how many times the text has been translated and retranslated in our different understandings in different contexts, things can get a bit muddled. But what I want to really point at, because I feel this portion really helps exemplify many of the concepts that we're working with, be it honor and shame, new creation, chaos and order, sacred spaces, righteousness and justice. We also have the ratification of certain covenants, but that's not really the main focus. What I really want to touch on are these main four concepts. Because as we are reading through Tazria and Metzora, it's giving you the instructions on how to achieve purity once again once you've fallen towards that the realm of death on that sliding scale of purity that we all kind of have in our minds. On one extreme end we have Hashem, we have God in the realm of life, being the most pure, the most order, the most perfect, the most sacred, the most honorable, and the most righteous. On the other end, we have the realm of death, exile, shame, chaos, the lack of sanctity, all these things, rebellion. And as we go on, we see that there are certain things which happen, which are either out of our control, be it through that we see in Tazria, be it through childbirth, through emissions, through different bodily functions which may occur, which are not themselves indicative of any sort of moral fault, but they still put us a little closer towards the realm of death on that sliding scale of ritual purity. And having a balance and understanding both is key to understanding the Torah and proceeding forward with both faith and obedience. So we must examine what purity is in regards to sacred spaces and maintaining holiness or maintaining Kedusha. So in this case, we're going to be focusing on 6 sacred spaces for a moment. Purity can be broken down into 2 camps. You have ritual purity and moral purity. Both of these we've already covered previously, but it always helps to review them. Understanding which applies within this parasha can help clarify several misconceptions about what a sin offering is meant to actually alleviate, since sin offering is thrown around several times in these 2 parashas. Interestingly enough, guilt offerings are only applicable in one circumstance, but sin offerings are applied in nearly every other circumstance. The Amplified Bible, I feel, has a really good translation, at least my favorite so far, which is purification or purified. And the events and circumstances are not treated like other ancient Near Eastern mythologies, where with humans trying to parse out what pleases and displeases the deities, and demons will randomly attack them, and the people don't really know why. They're just trying to essentially react and play catch up consistently. Hashem is not condemning people for the natural bodily functions and conditions which occur. He is, however, showing a distinction between ritual and moral purity, as can be seen by the commandment of women after they have a child. After the appropriate amount of time, depending on the gender of the child, has been completed, the woman will bring a burnt offering as a way of thanking Hashem, thanking God for allowing her to survive the trials of childbirth, and a sin offering. And again, the Amplified Bible has a really good translation of sin offering being a purity offering. So this is not necessarily a sin in terms of a moral wrongdoing or something that they rebelliously or high-handedly did. This is something that it is because of the shedding of blood, they are brought further away in a ritual sense from that perfect order, from that perfect purity. And so now with the offering, they are then allowed to return to that sacred space, which they had lost access previously because of the shedding of blood. So again, just to reiterate, this offering is not because the woman has done anything wrong or immoral. However, again, the shedding of blood causes them to be ritually impure and therefore disqualifies them from drawing near to the ritually pure presence of Hashem. And again, the goal is to always draw closer to the perfect order of God. And that is a balance of all things, both moral and ritual. And though there is no temple at this time, it's important that we understand and internalize these ritual purity laws because they have throughout history helped our people stay more hygienic, stay healthier, and stay safer. A great example is even during the Black Death. The Black Death is a good example in Europe, considering that many of the Jewish populations had less issues with the plague because they were following the Torah to the letter, as it's stated in Tazria and Metzora. And so if they have these particular issues, particular skin conditions, and as we know, the Black Death is a bacterial skin infection, they would follow these same sort of purity laws. They would bathe, they would mikvah, they would do things a lot more normally than the rest of the population would, and so they would die in less numbers than the rest of the population. Moving on from Tazria into Metzora, now things begin to shift a little more. It becomes less purely about ritual purity, and it begins to edge more into the realm of moral purity and ritual purity at the same time. And there are some fantastic examples of this. In chapter 13, we can see verse 8, the priest shall look, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. We need to understand also that leprosy was associated with moral wrongdoing, associated with previous moral corruption in the family or idol worship, and it is something that then breeds isolation. Then you are then exiled, you're cast out. You have now shame in your family. It creates chaos in your life. You are now barred from all the sacred spaces. You can now no longer fulfill key components of the covenants which we are bound to with God. And we are now further away from that perfect order, that perfect presence. So leprosy in of itself may have just been a simple skin condition, a bacterial infection of the skin, but to the audience and in its context, this is also an issue of who you are as a person and your moral standing with God, which then makes the healing of the leper by Yeshua even more impactful, considering the leper was touched by Yeshua directly and then was told to present himself to the priests, which then once we go into chapter 14 and learn the laws of cleansing, the laws of cleansing a leper, then we see all the things that the leper would need to do at the temple with the priests. Once healed of their condition, they need to go through certain rites to first access the city, since Jerusalem had a much higher level of holiness, higher level of kedusha. And then to get to the temple to be presented to the priest there required a completely separate series of events and offerings to allow them to, again, draw closer to that sacred space, to regain that honor, to become a new creation, to return to that order, that righteousness, and be able to fulfill those covenants. We can see in chapter 14 is where we begin the mentioning of guilt offerings in verse 11 and 12. And the priest who pronounces him clean shall present the man to be cleansed and the aforesaid before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Then the priest shall take one lamb and bring it for a guilt offering with the log of oil and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then in verse 13, next he shall slaughter the male lamb in the place where they slaughter the sin offering or purity offering and the burnt offering. And the place of the sanctuary for the guilt offering, like the sin offering or purity offering, belongs to the priest. It is most holy. This next verse, verse 14, also has huge implications because it is extremely rare to have the direct manipulation of blood touching people within the temple. It didn't happen very often. It happened with Aaron and his sons being ordained. It happened with the children of Israel and Moses as they're being linked to the altar, to the covenant of God at Mount Sinai. And now it's happening here in verse 14. The priest shall then take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Meanwhile, this is happening in front of everybody. So again, we're seeing different concepts, again, being touched on. Honor is being restored. This person is becoming a new creation. Order is being reestablished. They now have access again to this sacred space through the righteousness and justice of Hashem. Now they're being lifted up. And so that, as we can see in verse 20 of the same chapter, the priest shall offer up the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he will be clean. And at this point, he will be clean of both the moral purity because of the guilt offering, thus quelling any questions about previous sins or idol worship. And then with the burnt offering and the sin offering, or the purity offering, now they're ritually pure, thus now establishing that they now belong in the camp of Israel once again, and that no one can ever say that they are a leper, because they have been ordained and proclaimed clean by the priests and have been reestablished as a full sovereign citizen and someone who has all the same rights as everyone else and is of the same moral upright standing as everyone else. Finally, in the last part of 14, going into chapter 15, another interesting aspect we see is the cleansing of a leper's house. And I bring up the leper's house because because the priest and the people involved within these commandments take a very practical approach to diagnosing, to quarantining, to examining, to re-examining, to monitoring this mold or whatever this mark may be within the house, removing the necessary elements, and if necessary, completely bulldozing the house and tearing it all down. And living in a place like Florida or Puerto Rico, you have a really good sense of mold and how vicious and how quickly it can spread and how unhealthy it can be. So this does make a lot of sense to me just in a practical way. But the interesting thing I see, or that I've been picking up on, is in verse 49 of chapter 14, verse 48 and 49. If, on the other hand, the priest comes in and makes an inspection, and the mark has not indeed spread in the house after the house has been replastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean because the mark has not reappeared. To cleanse the house, then, he shall take 2 birds and cedar wood and a scarlet string and hyssop, and he shall slaughter the bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. It's interesting to me that they take a practical approach to ensure the house is safe for inhabitants, that the mark and the mold or whatever it may be has not spread, and then they perform this ritual to ritually cleanse the house. Now, to us in the Western world, it doesn't quite make sense because a house is a house. It doesn't necessarily need a ritual cleansing so long as the actual issue has been addressed, which we do see they do address by making sure that the mark doesn't continue to spread. But we have to understand the context of the audience at this time, being that they believe that demons would inhabit the house, demons would inhabit the walls and attack them and use their home as a nesting ground for evil. So to have this balance of the practical cleansing of a home and then the spiritual ritual cleansing of a home, maybe not spiritual, a ritual cleansing of the home, to allow those to reoccupy the home to feel safer in every aspect, both physically and spiritually, to know that their home is cleansed, both physically of this mark and of any potential evil spirits or impurity or uncleanliness. Finally, in chapter 15, there's just a few verses I do want to touch on because, again, they do mention the idea of a sin offering. And at no point in chapter 15 does it mention a guilt offering. So again, we've now left the realm of moral impurity and ritual impurity and have gone back to ritual purity. As for example, chapter 15, verse 14, then on the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord to the doorway of the tent of meeting and give them to the priest. Verse 15, and the priest shall offer them, one for a sin or a purity offering, the other for a burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement on his behalf before the Lord because of his discharge. And then verse 29 and 30. Then on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them in to the priest to the doorway of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer the one for a sin or purity offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement on her behalf before the Lord because of her impure discharge. So again, we can clearly see that when it comes to certain functions of the body which are not in our control, the Torah clearly states that there is a difference between ritual purity and moral purity. If you have a particular issue, it does not mean that you've done something to bring it on yourself. It does not mean that you are an evil person, that you've rebelled against the covenant of God. It means that there is a bodily function which has occurred. And the Torah takes a very pragmatic approach in that you just simply need to be ritually cleansed that you may then reapproach and return back to the holy presence of God.